He is not emotionally available. He just doesn't know how to express his feelings, right? I never know what he's thinking. He doesn't tell me how he feels. He's closed off. Maybe, maybe it's because he's afraid to express feelings or emotions. It might because it might make him look weak, or he thinks it'll make him look weak, right? Maybe it's this idea of a vulnerability, as sometimes the complaints with people who are accused of being emotionally unavailable, right? Sometimes it might be said it's because they're afraid of vulnerability, which is can be thought of as a trust issue too, right? We hear a lot of talk about men who are emotionally unavailable in a relationship. To be fair, it can be women too, right? But in my experience, it's typically guys that kind of get more of the bad rap for this, right? Not being emotionally available, unavailable emotionally. You get the idea. And I want to speak about a few concepts in this video. There can be a lot of ways to speak about this issue, right? And I have a few I'm going to share today. So it's emotional availability issue. I've always said over the years when I have worked with individuals who feel frustrated being in a relationship with someone who is emotionally unavailable, they're complaining about it. They're looking for the explanation. How come this person they just never let me know how they feel, and the person feels anxious and insecure about this relationship because of the lack of availability, right? So this happens. It happens quite a bit. So I've always said, in my estimation, a person who is emotionally unavailable, it's more of a decision than it is because of the lack of the ability to do it. It really is. And I'm going to explain what I mean by this. There can be an element of, a person may have trust or vulnerability issues. It's not that they don't, understand what they're feeling. It's just they believe or they feel as if they communicate honestly and take responsibility for their feelings to give that information to another person, they feel vulnerable, right? That's going to put them at a disadvantage or might make them weak or appear to be weak. You get the idea. The truth is, there are some individuals, this is not a vulnerability issue. In fact, there's people who feel very confident, very sure of themselves. They feel very capable and strong. So it's not always a vulnerability issue. This, a lot of times, is more of a control issue. That's right, control. At a certain point, there is a threshold. Maybe if a person could learn some tools, right? You can learn some tools to be more effective at communicating your feelings and also validating another person's emotions and feelings too. It's the other side of it, right? Sure, there's things you can learn to do it better for sure. But most individuals have a basic understanding of how to share how they feel with another person, right? So in this sense, it is a decision. They're choosing not to do it. What's also interesting, and I'm get into why people choose not to do it here in a minute. But what is also interesting is that people who are complained on or accused of being emotionally unavailable, it's interesting how they have no problem expressing anger, right? Because anger is an emotion. Now, anger doesn't occur in a vacuum, of course. I mean, most people are not just walking down the sidewalk and then become angry for no reason. No, there's a context. So, anger is a secondary emotion that follows a primary emotion. For example, maybe you're feeling frustrated or you feel disrespected or you feel undermined, right? Yeah, these can result in you then feeling angry. So, anger is secondary. And anger, just real quick, like, is similar to anxiety in that it has a purpose to influence or compel behaviors. It's trying to tell you something is not right. So anger in of itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's a side issue. But back to the point is people who are not very emotionally available and more of the full spectrum of emotions where they can just communicate in real time or communicate all of the feelings, right? But they don't. But they will communicate that anger, and I call it anger as control. Anger as control. So a couple of things here. One, if I choose to be emotionally unavailable, I'm withholding information, because that's what emotions are. You're providing information to an individual that you're in a relationship with. And when you provide information, because all emotions have implications or specific messages about situations. If I feel sad, if I feel guilty, if I'm feeling embarrassed, if I don't feel valued, if I feel hurt, I'm feeling undermined, I don't feel valued. You get the idea. They all have different implications. So you're providing this information. And when you do that for another person, it reduces the uncertainty about the relationship, which is a good thing. So because it feels, the relationship will feel less uncertain and more predictable, because you're defining the relationship and providing information, the other person in the relationship with you is going to feel less anxious and more secure about the relationship with you. Imagine that. However, the other side, or the other side of this, is that if I choose to withhold my emotions, not provide that information, to be rigid, I'm doing the opposite. I'm creating more uncertainty about this relationship and situations involving the relationship. And when I create more uncertainty by withholding the information my emotions can provide to the person, I cause them to become more anxious and insecure about the relationship. Imagine that. So in this sense, in a toxic, dysfunctional way, yeah, it gives me an advantage. It gives me leverage over the other person, because I'm always keeping them on their toes, not ever letting them feel fully comfortable. Gives me the upper hand, right? And by the way, real quick, like, who has more power or control or leverage in a relationship? In the sense you want to think of it that way, which can be kind of a toxic way, right? But who has more leverage? Who has more advantage in terms of this information exchange? The person who shares the least or the most? Well, as you're probably going to imagine where I'm going with this, the person who's sharing the least definitely has the upper hand, the advantage. So withholding your emotions can be a power play. I'm going to have the advantage for sure, because the other person is giving me a bunch of information. And usually this is what will happen. You'll have an out of balance relationship where one partner is available. They do provide a lot of information and context with their feelings and how they're feeling about the relationship and situations. And the other person just gets to receive all that information. That's great for them, because they can calculate and factor that in, and how they're going to maybe position or move themselves in the relationship and how they behave. They, however, are not reciprocating. They're not giving you much of anything back. So then that there lies in the situation with the other person, feeling anxious, insecure, because of all the uncertainty that is created by the person who withholds the information. So in this context, the person who shares the least does have the upper hand over the other person. Oftentimes, this is done on purpose to create a state of anxiety and insecurity in another person, while also maybe doing subtle things to try to whittle down that person's self-esteem. And therefore, they become this source of validation for the other person that they then seek after for their sense of approval or to feel reassured, and so on and so on. There's a lot of context and directions I can go with this, how this manipulation can be used, whether it's to keep the person always on their toes, so to speak, or to make yourself even more of the source of their validation so they can feel less anxious, right? So in a balanced relationship, there's an equal, it's a mutual exchange of reciprocity back and forth with emotional availability. Both people are secure within the relationship, and both people are being taken care of. So at a certain point, there is no excuse to not be emotionally available. It is a decision. And I do understand there's context that people may need to work through issues of trust. Maybe they have trauma from the past. I get it. I understand. But even then, it's still a decision to make that decision that you're going to make it a priority to be more emotionally available if you place value on the person you say you love, that's your partner. That is what will compel you to practice the behavior of being emotionally available. Because ultimately, as I say all the time, it's only your behaviors and actions that demonstrates where you place the most value, what's important. It's whatever you make a priority. So if you're not making this a priority, by default, you're saying it's not important. And that other person also is not important. You can learn a new normal to be emotionally more available. You can learn another way to feel more secure within a relationship without feeling like you need the upper hand, because it is a refusal if they're not doing it. And to the extent they're going to eventually do it, that's a decision. It's a decision. And only our behaviors and actions will prove that.